Rigsters here, back with another IL-2 video. This time around, I'm going to be, per user request, doing a brief taxi and possibly takeoff in the Hawker Tempest Mark V. The Hawker Tempest is unique in the fact that it has a very strange fuel mixture setup. It's very easy to understand, but it's not the same as most other aircraft in the game. And it also has a strange P factor or engine torque for how it handles on the ground. Instead of twisting to the left like most props, it actually twists to the right. So instead of applying right rudder, you have to apply left rudder. So let's get started on the key bindings in settings. Now this also baffled me too. Under settings and controls, when you go to plane engine controls, you need the following, just like most aircraft. You need the engine mixture control, just like normal. But you also need a binding for the water radiator, which is an on or off switch, which you need to manage your engine temperature. Now you might be saying, well, that's pretty easy. You just do the engine water radiator shutters axis, right? Nope. It doesn't work that way in this game. Confusingly, and it's probably also is a little bit historical, but they should say this in the options menu. This is not what you actually use to open and close the radiator. The key binding you actually want is the BF 109, 110, and Spitfire water radiator open on one button and close on the other. Yeah, it took me, when I first learned this aircraft, about 30 minutes looking through each individual engine setting, and then finally found that it actually was the Spitfire water radiator open and close that also are for the earlier marks of the 110 and 109 as well. So once you bind these two, it's pretty much a cakewalk. You either switch it on or off. That's it for the Tempest key binding wise. So we will go into multiplayer, dogfight, and use our good old friend, the Combat Box Trading Server. Now that we are at the Combat Box Trading and Dogfight server, what we're going to do is go to the Takeoff practice spawn at 2107 and select the Tempest Mark V Series 2. And before I briefly want to go into this, on the map here, as I said before in previous videos on the 190 and Mustang, they have grid squares and numbers. So when you say 2107, I just use the mouse wheel to scroll in here by default. This is where I normally will practice for aircraft to take off and land, hence the name. And when you left click on that, as a friendly reminder, this is the list of planes you can have. If they're not have a lock symbol on, you can fly those. And you click on the plane. That's how you can get this set up. So let's go to the setup for the Tempest Mark II. This is what the aircraft looks like on default. The only mods for this aircraft is the Sabre 2A with 11 pounds boost and two bomb options, the 1000 or the 500 pound bombs. I rarely, if ever, actually use that. The only mod I would recommend, since there isn't any perceived drawback, is if you have the option for the Sabre 2A engine, that allows for even more engine power. So I would highly recommend equipping that. And for fuel, I don't think this aircraft is as fuel sensitive as per se the Mustang that I covered in the previous video. So you can actually carry pretty much any fuel amount from 718 to 11%. And for this training, we'll just do 60%, which in this case, because it's a different aircraft, it's different amounts. As I said before, let's do 430 liters. And these are 4 twin millimeter or 4 20mm cannon shells. So they're on the wings. So set the convergence generally below 400. the default 240 is usually sufficient for most situations that this plane gets itself into. But you can play around with that. You can hit accept there and get started. Okay, so just like before, you do get F2 view on this server. Most of them do not. This is what it looks like outside. It's a pretty big airplane. It's very good below 15,000 feet. Above that, it struggles, because this was intended to be a medium altitude or lower aircraft interceptor during the war. So inside the cockpit here, as I press F1, you'll see this lever right here. You will know if you bound the radiators correctly when you press the key binding for the 110, BF-109, and Spitfire, moving up and down with one single key press, or button binding press. It only goes up or down, so they're on or off for the radiator. The next thing you want to look for is for fuel mixture, which is right over here where it says start, normal, and cutout. You want to set the fuel mixture towards start. And the techno chat will say that as well. And then you just press the E key to turn it on. And then I'll zoom out the cockpit here. And then close the canopy, of course. Default is right Alt C. You may have that bound differently. So, whoops. So with that bearing in mind, just let it start up. And while it's starting up here, I have to move the pilot head down a little bit. You'll see these two gauges. The boost is kind of cut off by this weird goofy bracing. Is the RPM boost gauge, and just below that is the fuel in gallons gauge. Now, for this particular aircraft, this is one of the very few in the game that you can continuously run on climb power, or aka higher power mode, for a very long time. 60 minutes, in fact. So for most sorties, you could do 3,700 per power engine RPM, which is this gauge right here that says 10 to 50. And the boost, which is +7, so you just have it just near to +8 on the boost. That's how they measure their manifold pressure for British aircraft. And here, right on the bottom here, you'll see the oil temp that goes from 0 to 100. The radiator temp goes from 40 to 140. Generally speaking, for the oil, you don't have to watch as often. It has a max, as this chart says. This is a modded skin. Has an operating temperature of 60 to 90 and the water 65 to 125. So you mostly want to watch this green gauge, which says rad temp, which is right here, next to this big red blinker of a button. That's the gauge you want to mostly watch for cooling. The oil temperature doesn't get as hot as the water, so you have to keep your tabs on that. And since we're on the ground, I'm going to open up the water radiator shutter so it stays cool while it's idling. Next thing you want to do is, once the engine is started, when you go back to default view, as you can clearly see, you want to adjust the fuel mixture, which you can look around the cockpit or rely on technical chat. You want to actually decrease that to normal. Yes, that is the opposite of what most aircraft in this game do. You actually want to decrease the fuel mixture, because if you fail to do that, like if I keep it on start here, I cannot raise the main engine throttle more than 10%. When I go to normal, like this, you can increase the power, and you can see the RPMs are also going up and down as well. So the next thing to do to get rolling is increase the per power RPM to about 90%. You can also do 100 if you find it not being as responsive, but it has so much torque, I rarely go beyond 90 on the ground, as you'll soon find out. Now, one other oddity of this aircraft is it has differential brakes. So the braking system in this aircraft is different from what you're used to. What you have to do in under settings, key mapping, plane controls, you need to have mapped the wheel brakes. Now in this case I use slash, comma, and period, but you can set this to whatever you want. You need to be able to easily reach these either on your joystick or keyboard. Wheel brakes are critical for the Tempest. If you do not have wheel brakes, you will not be able to do the next thing I'll demonstrate with the rudder. The left and right wheel brakes are not as helpful, but are recommended to have bound as well for the vast majority of the aircraft in the game. So once you've bound that, press accept and go back to the game here. So what does this mean, Rigsters? What the hell is differential brakes? So basically what that means is if you hold down the wheel brakes button, you'll see this lever right here. If you adjust your pilot head or view, you see it going up and down, and there's a gauge right here. And if you listen closely, you'll hear a hiss sound. That means you're engaging and disengaging the wheel brakes. It's actually, in my opinion, once you get used to this, it's actually not too difficult to understand, but it's not very ambiguous. It's very ambiguous. It's not very clear. So when I move the rudder to the right and I press the right brake, notice now as I zoom in here, the right brake is moving. But if I let go of the right rudder, now both brakes are working. If I want to go to the left, now you see as I'm holding left rudder with my joystick in particular, I'm now will turn to the left on the ground. Once I learned that, it's much easier to taxi this high torque aircraft. One last quick note before I start taxiing. The views on this aircraft are abysmal towards the rear because of this massive plate. So you have to really play around with the fixed snap view if you're relying on non-IR or track hat or VR. You have to rely on snap views. You have to set them up accordingly to get better views. So I'll press F2 here, and we'll slowly increase the power to say like 30%. And I'll have my fingers ready on the main wheel brakes. You have to do 50. Just to get it rolling and quickly back that down. You hit your hands very quick on the main wheel brakes. It's a little tricky to get it moving, but once you get it moving, then it will move. You don't want to really do much more than like 50% power on the ground when you're trying to taxi. And if you're on grass, you may need to increase the engine RPM even higher. So I'm going to do 100% just so I can get this moving a little better for you. Because there's a lot of resistance. And I'm using the main wheel brakes and right rudder. And as you can see, I can quickly correct the torque tendency of this aircraft. It's a little hard to manipulate the camera and the aircraft at the same time in this view, just as a heads up. But now, just like with any other aircraft, you don't want to go a million miles an hour. Just want to keep it low engine power once you get it moving. And now we're taxiing like a professional, or at least more professional. When I hold down the left rudder and man wheel brakes, look, you start turning. And if you do it too hard, you start doing Tokyo drift, as I call it. The real terminology is ground looping. So you gotta be careful when you turn the rudder with the main wheel brakes. You can easily do ground looping, especially towards the right. But as you can see, once you discover the magic of differential braking, some aircraft do this a little bit differently. But in this particular one, use the main wheel brakes and turn the rudder to get this aircraft to turn once you're moving. I set the propeller RPM to maximum because I'm finding that I just need a little more responsiveness so I don't take 10 years to taxi to the main runway. Because I don't want to spend like 50 minutes trying to get this aircraft in position. That'd be ridiculous. And then just hold down left rudder, main wheel brake, hit main wheel brake. Whoop. Yeah, that's what I mean. You can ground loop a little bit like that too. That can happen. So what I want to do is correct that just a little bit here. You have to be really ambidextrous with some of these aircraft when you have a non-HOTAS flight stick. So that's really important. You keep your hands on the corresponding main wheel brake, engine throttle, and rudder. Alright, so now we are pretty much straightened. I'll go back into the cockpit in F1 view, which is the default. Now, the next thing I want to do is I'm going to reduce the engine propeller RPM to 95. And look at the chart here. So ideally, since we're 60% fuel loaded, we need to take off around 100 to 105 miles an hour. Landing speed's 80 to 83. So the speedometer is right here. It's in terms of imperial measurement in miles per hour. So between the 8 and the 10 is when you're going to gradually pull back the stick so you can lift off the ground. And have the left your fingers ready on the main engine thrust and left rudder. You slowly increase the power. Just get it moving. I'm doing left rudder because see how it's starting to swing, and gradually increase it to 90% on the main engine throttle. There we go. Now we got it to there. It's in between the 8 and the 10. I know it's hard to see for YouTube. I can gently pull off here and retract the landing gear. And I can reduce the engine propeller RPM to 90%. And just hand fly for a little while and watch the speed go up. It's ridiculous to see how fast this aircraft can do in such a short amount of time. It's a lot of engine power. Now if I do auto level, which in some key bindings is left shift A, I can really pick up the speed. If I zoom in here, I can show you. We're already hitting 240 before the end of the runway, which is ridiculous how fast and powerful this aircraft is at low altitude. One last thing I'll mention as I'm flying around a little bit is at 8,000, is it 800 in technical? No. 8,850 is when you want to have a key mapping, which I'll auto level right here real quick. You need to change manually the supercharger speed, which is under plane engine controls. It is right over here. The engine superchargers mode switch. There are some aircraft you have to manually switch from high gear to low gear, or low gear to high gear, and high gear to low gear, respectively. The Russian aircraft, a lot of them have that. Some British aircraft like this one has that as well. I usually use left shift S, but you can change that to any key binding you want, or button. And what that does is when you press it on the cockpit, it will look like this gear lever right here. You can change the gear from 1 to 2. Since we're lower than 8,800, we keep it in gear 1. But if I climb to 8,800, I start losing boost, which is right over here. I don't gain as much power because it's geared for a higher altitude. So if I go to gear 2, you can see the engine RPM is less. When I'm in gear 1, it's a little more. And then if I shift to gear 2, it's less. So with that being in mind, let's go to F2 view. And one last neat little thing while I wrapped up this video is that when you open and close the water radiator, this massive looking chin opens and closes right around here. That's really cool. I like that. That's how it works. Alright. So that's it for this video on IL-2 of doing a taxi and a brief takeoff. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you wish to support the channel, I do run a Ko-Fi page with the goal of getting a better flight stick so I can practice and maneuver better aircraft maneuvers and potentially make better content related to flight sim games such as this or DCS. And with that, this is Rigsters Journey, signing off.